Um,
Good morning, everyone. We'll get started with the event in just a couple minutes. All right, good morning. Welcome to the Bill Roll Lecture 2022. My name is Jacob Glazier. I'm an assistant professor of psychology here at the University of West Georgia. I want to welcome those people here on campus in Carrollton, and a good morning, good evening, or simply hello to those attendees on Zoom today from around the world. It is my distinct honor to be able to welcome everybody to the 2022 Bill Roll Lecture, co-sponsored this year by the Psychology Program and Ingram Library Special Collections, where Dr. William G. Roll's archive is housed. This annual event celebrates the tradition of parapsychological research at the University of West Georgia. Parapsychology is, of course, the application of psychological science to the investigation of the paranormal, including extrasensory perception, mind-matter interaction, the survival question, entity encounters, and so on. Yet the confluence of these two, parapsychology and psychology at UWG, creates a unique human science-based approach toward this very end. Rael White, an important qualitative and feminist researcher in parapsychology, called these instances when the paranormal happens exceptional human experiences. Such a conceptual move away from psi, the paranormal, the anomalous, most explicitly emphasizes that these are real experiences that people are having. Experiences out in the world, in a naturalized setting, and within a community of others. Nowadays, shortened to exceptional experiences, researchers here at UWG and elsewhere aim to explore the paranormal through a variety of different methods. expanding on the traditionally experimental and quantitative history of the discipline. These more inclusive approaches include narrative analysis, phenomenological description, grounded theory, ethnography, and many more. In fact, the research lab here at the University of West Georgia, the Exceptional Experiences Research Lab, or EERL, often employs mixed methods approaches that seek to capture the diverse and multiplicitous nature and nuance of these very experiences. The docket of presenters today will no doubt speak to this. We will begin with Dr. Christine Simmons-Moore, Professor of Psychology at the University of West Georgia and the progenitor of the Bill Roll Lecture, and move on to our featured researcher this year, Dr. Nancy Zingrone of North Central University, the Azire, and the Parapsychology Foundation, who will deliver the lecture, Made Out of Whole Cloth, the Life and Work of Carlos S. Alvarado, PhD. Before I turn it over to Dr. Simmons-Moore, we are excited this year to announce the creation of the Bill Roll Lecture Fund. This new account will allow those individuals or entities wishing to sponsor parapsychological research and support the Bill Roll Lecture at the University of West Georgia the ability to do so. You may visit the psychology program's webpage for further information on how to donate. During the lecture, we ask that the Zoom attendees please keep your audio muted. Attendees should keep in mind that the entire event is being recorded, and the recording will be made public for later viewing. And all attendees, virtual, in-person, and those in non-corporal form, please save your questions for the Q&A, which will take place after Dr. Nancy Zingrone's presentation. Join me in providing an enthusiastic and warm welcome to Dr. Simmons-Moore.
Hopefully is that working? Can you hear me okay? Excellent. All right. Welcome everybody again in person and online and other entities. I like that. I'll steal that. Welcome to the 2022 Bill Roll Lecture. It's been a while. The last lecture was in 2019, so it's really exciting to be back here again. As Dr. Glazier noted, I began the Bill Roll Lecture in 2012 on the occasion of Dr. Roll's death. Dr. Roll is really the reason I'm here at the University of West Georgia, and it's my honor to have met him on more than one occasion and been encouraged by him specifically to apply to work here. Dr. Roll was from Bremen in Germany. His interests in parapsychology were inspired by his own out-of-body experience at the age of 16. His academic journey took him to Oxford University in the UK, and then later on to the US, where he worked at the Duke Parapsychology Lab in Durham, North Carolina. He then went on to direct the Psychical Research Foundation in North Carolina too. Dr. Roll was on the faculty at University of West Georgia in the early 1980s until his retirement in 2008. He's well known for his systematic research into haunting and poltergeist cases in particular, including the Seaford and the Columbus cases. He is survived by his wife, Lydia, and his children, Leaf, Bill, and his grandchildren. I see that some of those relatives are in the room today, so it's really exciting to virtually meet you. And hopefully I've pronounced your names correctly. The annual event that we are celebrating today is designed as a memorial to Dr. Roll by inviting a key theorist or researcher in academic parapsychology to give a presentation to the campus community at UWG and beyond. In this emerging from COVID Zoom era, we hope to extend our outreach nationally and internationally, and I see that as well as I've been monitoring the wait room. So we really are moving internationally, which is wonderful. We hope, we're transcending some time zones this morning, which I think we are. Our speaker today, Dr. Zingrone, has a long-spanning career in parapsychology and psychology, and she's going to talk to you today about her work with her late husband, Dr. Carlos Alvarado. Before I formally introduce Dr. Zingrone, I'd also like to share a little bit more about our work here at UWG. So I'm personally fortunate to have been able to teach and engage in research in parapsychology at the University of West Georgia. In addition, we have parapsychology classes at all three levels. So we have bachelor's degree, master's degree, and a PhD here where you can do classes on parapsychology. I have run several studies since I moved here in 2011, including actually a study with synesthesia and psi phenomena with Dr. Zingrone and Dr. Alvarado. We still need to write some of that up, in fact. So we're going to be remembering Dr. Alvarado also today. As Jake mentioned, we have launched an official research group at UWG that started officially in 2020. We are called the Exceptional Experiences Research Lab, or EERL. It too extends beyond Carrollton, as my co-founder, Dr. Mitchell, who's here as well, I think. Hi, David. Continues to be involved from California at the CIIS. Dr. Glazier is a co-member alongside other colleagues in anthropology and sociology and several graduate students and undergrads. Some of those are here today. We are currently working on several really exciting projects, including one on psychometry, one that Dr. Glazier is working on folklore. We're currently launching a study on floating and ESP, and that's with a local therapy center called Terramar. In fact, we're looking for experienced floaters to take part in that if you're interested. Please get in touch. Jake also mentioned our unique special collections here at West Georgia. We have some interesting things in the archives at UWG, and that's coordinated by Lynn Olivieri. Special Collections are co-sponsoring our event today, and we're grateful for their support. Dr. Alvarado's own collection has freshly arrived in Carrollton, and I'm so excited that we're able to add this collection to our existing humanistic psychology and parapsychology collections here. With that said, I want to make mention of the Ingo Swan Fellowship that is now open for applications, I believe. Lynn can correct me. I think it's March sometime, and we're in March. I think the deadline's in June sometime. So the Ingo Swan Fellowship is open for applications, and that funds a fellow to come to West Georgia and engage in research in the parapsychology and human consciousness collections here, with a particular focus on the Ingo Swan collection. The award covers costs for travel, housing, and other expenses, and is open to anyone who's engaged in graduate level, postdoctoral, or independent research. Applicants should submit a CV and proposal, and details can be found on our library's website. So it is my great honor and pleasure to host my friend and colleague, Dr. Nancy Zingrone, as our 2022 Bill Roll speaker. Nancy has a long-spanning 45-year career in both psychology and academic parapsychology. To date, she has published extensively and prolifically, and has an impressive number of publications, many of which are co-authored with her late husband, Dr. Alvarado. She earned her PhD from Edinburgh University in the UK, in fact in Scotland, in 2006, and that makes her my academic auntie, as my own doctoral supervisor also read for his PhD at Edinburgh under the same supervisor, Professor Bob Morris, so we're related. Nancy is a two-time past president of the Parapsychology Association, and has also worked as an integral figure in the Parapsychology Foundation in several roles, in fact. Nancy has also worked at several other core institutions with an academic focus on parapsychology, including the Division of Perceptual Studies at UVA, or DOPS, Atlantic University, and the Rhine Research Center. She and Dr. Alvarado have also worked extensively to promote academic parapsychology via the PF and their own organization, the Alvarado and Zingrone Virtual Institute of Research and Education, the AZIA. This is a teaching and learning project inaugurated in 2009, and that has comprised online courses, a library and learning center that are installed in the virtual world, Second Life, and YouTube channel of the Parapsychology Online. Their Paramoot conferences have aimed to educate the public about parapsychology. Nancy currently has an academic position at North Central University in psychology, so she really is transcending parapsychology and psychology and connecting the two. Her husband, Dr. Alvarado, has touched many lives as a personality and via his extensive academic work. He's significantly influenced my own academic journey and was an amazing person. I'm very happy to be celebrating the memory of two great parapsychologists today, Dr. Roll and Dr. Alvarado. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Nancy Zingrone, who will give a presentation that is titled Made Out of Whole Cloth, The Life and Work of Dr. Carlos S. Alvarado. Thank you very much.
Dr. Zingrone, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Let me share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
And you can hear me, I think.
Yep.
All right. Let me move the folks off of my, I can't do that. I'm moving you around a little bit so I can see my speaker's notes. I don't normally do this, and you'll notice as I'm going along that I'm reading them. I just don't feel like I can get through this if I don't have a touchstone in terms of the script. So I want to thank Dr. Glazer and Dr. Simmons-Moore for your kind words, and I appreciate your opening remarks. And I want to say how honored I am to present in the Bill Roll Lecture Series. I'm especially honored by your interest in having me give a talk that will acquaint those of you who did not know my late husband with his life and work. For those of you who were his colleagues, friends, and family, my goal is to represent the extraordinary contributions he made over his all too brief 44-year professional career. As you will see, he started on the topic at an early age and then continued as he started throughout his life. Before I begin, I want to say that Carlos's relationship with Bill Roll was complicated. In the beginning, they often came down on different sides of theory, phenomena, or method, but even in the early days, Carlos's respect for Bill was immense. Over the years, that respect grew to a genuine, unshakable affection, culminating in Carlos's organization of the symposium honoring Bill's life's work at the 2012 Parapsychological Association Conference in Durham, North Carolina. I also wanted to mention that I took the photograph of Carlos on this title slide. He was sitting at his desk in the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia shortly after we all moved into the new building in 2008. Finally, I've already said that I'm glancing at my speaker's notes. I'm actually reading them. There are 4 sections. Wait a second. Okay, I just can't see the side of my thing. There are 4 sections to my talk today. The first section is a brief look at the definitions of whole cloth and whole cloth. This section was prompted by my discovery after the marketing came out, of course, that I did not convey the metaphor for Carlos's life that I wanted to convey in the title of this talk. That space between the words whole and cloth, or lack thereof, changed the meaning, and I forgot about that. The second section of the talk briefly focuses on some milestones in Carlos's life and work for those of you who did not know him well, using the places where he lived as an organizing principle. The third section represents the magnitude of his public-facing written contributions, an effort which has been greatly helped by the project initiated by Sonali Bhat Marwa and Ed May. This section provides a selection of Carlos's publications in the order of the places where he worked. Finally, the fourth section will attempt to describe and honor Carlos's legacy, what he, through the force of his intellect and his character, left behind. I will also mention what some of us will be doing to preserve and extend that legacy. On the slide, I included the first photograph I ever took of Carlos. That's this one. He was sitting at the research meeting table at the Institute of Parapsychology, then located in an old residential building on Buchanan Boulevard in Durham, North Carolina. That day was Carlos's first experience with the weekly research meetings, a tradition that has continued at the Ryan Research Center, at least when there isn't a pandemic on. That week was also his first time teaching in the annual summer study program. The other photo at the top was taken last year when we were celebrating his birthday. So the title. It has been a while since I used the term made out of whole cloth. And I forgot that when you put the space in between the two words, the term changes meaning completely and becomes something that I never had in mind. A little history of the term. Whole cloth, with the space between the words, was first used in the 1500s. It referred to a piece of cloth that ran the full length that could be woven on a single loom and that had never been cut into smaller pieces before it was used for a garment or a household linen. Wily and not so honest tailors in the 1800s in the UK and the US became very economical and used fabric that came from different bolts or were left over from a previous project. No harm in that, except that whoops, I lost myself here. There's no harm in that, except that the custom of advertising their garments were still of whole cloth and not too honestly. And by the 1840s, this bit of marketing abuse, calling a piecework garment made of whole cloth, came to be known to the general public. And the phrase meant a lie that was invented out of nothing. So Pinocchio territory. In looking for an image to go with the phrase, I found the definitions and was alarmed at what I had done with my title slide. There was nothing about Carlos that was false. What I meant is represented on this slide. What you see there is a whole cloth without the space between the two words, a whole cloth quilt. This type of quilt is made from a single piece of fabric big enough to fit a bed of a specific size. In whole cloth quilting, the fabric is of a single color with repeating patterns that are embroidered onto the quilt top or made by the quilting stitches that secure the quilt bottom, the padding, and the top together. The metaphor evoked by whole cloth without a space was what I meant to say. In my head, the fabric symbolized Carlos's foundational curiosity about life and experience. And the intricate and nuanced patterns of a whole cloth quilt brought to mind how his foundation of empathy for others enriched his life and work. What it takes to complete a whole cloth quilt was, I thought, an equally good metaphor for the careful and sustained dedication he brought to his work. So the error in the original title of this talk is down to me. And the bottom line is, with apologies to the clever folks who have made a media empire out of eat this, not that, think this and not that. This slide shows a list of the places where Carlos lived. They are in the order in which he experienced them. Although, as you'll see, he lived twice in Puerto Rico, Charlottesville, and North Carolina. Alberto Alvarado, Carlos's brother, used this photo in his memorial essay on Carlos's life that was published in the Argentinian online periodical Y Boletín. While the expression on Carlos's face was probably impatience with the process of getting a school photograph taken, I like to think that this is the face of a serious child who was already figuring out what exactly he wanted to do and was impatient, waiting to get to that work. Carlos was born in Boston when his father, Carlos M. Alvarado, was working on a PhD in urban planning at Harvard. 6 months later, his father was called back to Puerto Rico to work in urban renewal. He became quite a famous fellow on the island. There is a newspaper clipping of his father and mother leaving the airplane on their arrival in San Juan, in which Carlos's father is holding him up and telling the reporters his son would be president, could be president because he was born in Boston. I love that clipping with its grainy photo, I must say. However, I am very grateful that the only presidency Carlos ever wanted or held was the presidency of the Parapsychological Association. He served his first term in 1995 while still a graduate student and was reelected for a 2-year term in 2002. As you can see from this photograph, at this point in his life, he was 14, and at 14, he was already reading the classics in psychical research and had begun to amass a personal library of some note. But he had a long list of books he wanted to acquire. He was particularly keen to get a copy of the autobiography, 30 Years of Psychical Research, that was written by the French Nobel laureate physiologist Charles Richet. In his essay, Albert told the story of a journey to New York City in the early 1970s with their father, when both brothers were on the hunt for things that fit their interests, which for Albert was architecture and jazz. The boys found their way to Samuel Weiser's occult bookshop in Lower Manhattan in search of the books on Carlos's list. And while Carlos was talking to the staff, Albert was combing the shelves and he found Richet's autobiography. Carlos mentioned this story on and off over the years while he was working on a paper about Richet. It was a great day for both of them. Carlos lived on the island from 1955 through 1978 when he left for JFK University. We returned to the island in 1995 after we completed our residencies at the University of Edinburgh. In 1998, we were hired as consultants to the Parapsychology Foundation in New York City and moved there to work on site in 2000. We visited the island frequently after we left until 2016, when we brought Carlos's mother home to our apartment to live out the last 1.5 years of her life. And I must say, I love that top photo, which is me, my father-in-law, Albert, and Carlos. We were certainly young and beautiful at that point. While most preteens and teenagers were out playing soccer or swimming in the Caribbean Sea, Carlos was in his air-conditioned room at home, surrounded by his books, and slowly piling up subscriptions to the main journals in the field. His oldest friend and frequent collaborator during his life was Alfonso Martinez Taboas, now a professor at Carlos Albizu University in San Juan. Alfonso is also a clinical psychologist, a prolific writer, and still an avid book collector himself. In his memorial to Carlos in the Bulletin, Alfonso described their meeting. He had written to the Society for Psychical Research to see if there was anyone else on the island who had subscribed. The secretary of the SPR sent Carlos's address to Alfonso. Alfonso wrote to Carlos, and Carlos replied. Both Alfonso and Carlos have said in the retelling of how they met that each of them expected to meet a stuffy, elderly gentleman, but hopefully with a shared interest in the field. Instead, they found each other. And there they were, one in high school and the other barely out of high school. One of their first forays into publishing in our field will be featured later in this talk. Patrick Geisler, now a professor of anthropology at Gustavus Adolphus College in St. Peter, Minnesota, wrote a memorial of Carlos that was published in the Journal of Anomalistics and reprinted in the Bulletin. Patrick and Carlos met in 1978 when they both attended the John F. Kennedy University to enroll. In Patrick's memorial, he identified 3 things that endured Carlos to him. One was Carlos's cheerful temperament. The other 2, as Patrick wrote, were the traits of a true colleague teacher. Carlos's encyclopedic knowledge and tireless desire to help others with their own research and their own careers. I agree wholeheartedly that these traits were a hallmark of Carlos's character and the engine of his productive and successful career. Even before he became ill, he never lost that desire. Oh, after he became ill, he never lost that desire to help others. He just changed his focus to how the people around him were feeling and tried to help them. That was a blessing for all of us. And now the montages. The photo at the top left was taken in 1982. Carlos had already moved to Charlottesville to take a position as a research assistant to the psychiatrist, Dr. Ian Stevenson, who founded the University of Virginia's then called Division of Parapsychology. His mother, Ileana Velez, who you see in this picture, was visiting. The middle picture is the 1986 Institute for Parapsychology. Fernham was the formal name of Ryan's Institute. It stood for Foundation for Research on the Nature of Man. This type of a photo was traditionally taken on the last day of the 8-week residential course, depicting all of the students, the staff, and any outside faculty who were there. Carlos is at the top right, and I am midway down the photo on the left. If you know people in the field, you'll see there Birgit and Rex Stanford and Dr. Dave Rogers, in addition to Dr. Broughton, Dr. Carpenter, Dr. Rao, and Dr. Palmer, and the rest of us, and Dorothy Pope off to the right at the bottom, the editor of the Journal of Parapsychology. And peeking out from the back is JB and Louisa Ryan's oldest son, Robbie. At the top right is, the top right is a photo taken in 1994 at the Amsterdam Parapsychological Association conference. Second from the left is Wellington Zangari, who is on this Zoom, now a professor of psychology of religion at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. To the left of him is Joanna Morris, and to the right is Carlos, and then to the right of Carlos, the first Kursler professor of parapsychology at Edinburgh, the late Dr. Bob Morris. Bob was our dissertations chair, and with his wife were our wonderfully welcoming landlords. Along the bottom row, the leftmost photo shows Lisette, president of the Parapsychology Foundation, Lisette Coley. She's also on the call, where we worked on site from 2000 to 2003. And we were young and beautiful then too. We are in front of Carlos's favorite library on the earth, the PF's Eileen J. Garrett Library. In the middle photo is Carlos sitting in front of about a third of his personal library in our first apartment in Charlottesville together. The last photo includes some of the staff at the now called Division of Perceptual Studies and was taken by Carlos in 2006. On the left of the photo are Emily and Ed Kelly, Jim Tucker, the current head of the unit. At the head of the table, Bruce Grayson, the recently retired head of the unit. On the right, the donor, and next to him, Pat Belisle, who was a fundraiser at UVA at the time and now works at Edgar Cayce's Association of Research and Enlightenment doing fundraising, and of course me. The top here in this montage was taken in 2008 at the University of Utrecht in the Senate Zaal, where the Parapsychology Foundation held a conference honoring their 1953 groundbreaking international conference. Bill Roll attended the recent conference in 2008 and contributed mightily to the liveliness of the discussions. The middle photo was taken at the closing reception of that conference in a local institute. The late Gerd Hovelman, one of Carlos's favorite writing partners, was standing with us. To the right is Carlos managing the Atlantic University information table at a conference we held there in 2012. We took positions at the Atlantic University in Virginia Beach, Virginia in 2010 because our grants were winding down. You will see a couple of the publications he completed while he was at Atlantic later in the talk. On the bottom row is a photo of the faculty and then recent graduates of the Transpersonal Studies program at Atlantic University. That's a master's program. At the top of the photo, the second person from the left is Kevin Tedeschi, who retired recently from being the CEO of both the ARE and Atlantic University. The middle photo, we took ourselves at the ourselves at the beginning of our first ParaMOOC course in 2015, which covered scientific and academic approaches to psychic phenomena and experience. Carlos recruited 26 professors and researchers from all over the world to discuss their recent research for an hour or so with our students. And then we provided course materials and discussion forums and so on. The final photo is the one that I took of Carlos on the day we received the first copies of his only book, Charles Richet, a Nobel Prize winning scientist's explorations of psychic phenomena. Now on to Carlos's work. Don't worry, I'm going to read what's on those slides. From the next slide forward in this section, I am only going to summarize Carlos's publications in academic journals, except for the first one, which was a hopeful entry into academic publishing. His CV, which does not contain everything he has done over his lifetime, I've discovered, is 61 pages long. It includes a wide variety of topics from languages, grants, and awards, and some of the categories mentioned above that I will read in a minute. We made a deal early on in our relationship that it was important to make sure that Carlos had the freedom to do his own work as much as possible. When that goal coincided with his employer's plans for him, such as happened with the Parapsychology Foundation, the Division of Perceptual Studies, and Atlantic University, his work was supported as part of his job or all of his job. When he needed to settle in as an independent scholar and contribute project payments and grant money to the household, he did that. And when he wasn't being paid, I picked up the slack. We both believed strongly that his work as he developed it was important in its own right. Finding ways to make sure that he could do that work was a primary goal of our friendship and our marriage. I have never regretted that decision, not for a single moment in all the years we were together. And now, being immersed in his legacy and finding out his work was even more important than I understood, I am even more sure that we took the right path. The categories listed above comprise what Carlos did with his time: mentoring his students, colleagues, writers, and the students of others, service on dissertation committees, publishing for academic journals in several disciplines and several languages, writing for the general public, blogging, serving on editorial boards and as a book review editor, providing library aids such as bibliographies and basic topic essays for the Parapsychology Foundation's library and PF Lyceum website, writing encyclopedia entries and academic book chapters, lectures as part of his work duties in the Azire courses and for the courses of others, such as Dr. Simmons-Moore, all kinds of conference work from organizing, presenting, chairing meetings, and occasionally setting up and taking down the chairs, developing a group of collaborators with whom he crafted multilingual and multinational focuses in their publications together, and finally, giving interviews of all sorts, including the occasional middle school journalist over the years. To the right, the photograph is Carlos presenting at the Academy of Spiritual and Consciousness Studies in the 2010s in Chapel Hill. The middle one is presenting the lecture, What is Parapsychology, at the Parapsychology Foundation in New York in the 2000s. This video is up on the Parapsychology Foundation YouTube channel. And in 2014, giving a talk at a friend's online educational blog festival about his blogging activity. So what follows is a look at a selection of his published works. Granted, this first publication is not peer-reviewed and did not last so long. This was the single volume, I think there's only one volume, of Carlos's and Alfonso's journal, Exploring the Paranormal, that debuted when Carlos was 21 and Alfonso was 23. So let that soak in. These two young men were reading academic and scientific books and papers in psychology and psychical research in high school, and they founded a journal in college. When I found this volume in his papers and looked at the contents, the tables of content, I saw a couple of themes and professional habits that he would carry on throughout his life. For example, he kindly wrote an article called About Some Erroneous Concepts Regarding Parapsychology. While he continued criticizing theoretical ideas, intellectual analyses, and the lack of accuracy in historical detail across his life, he never said everything he was concerned with, but rather, as a good teacher would, picked a few key things and attempted to administer that bitter pill as kindly as possible. Starting in the first issue of Explorando and finishing in the combined third and fourth issues, he wrote quite a good article called Parapsychology, a Historical Vision. In all three issues, he wrote essay book reviews, one of which treated two books on similar topics, one in Spanish and one in English. That was typical of him, to find books on the same topic in multiple languages and write an essay about them together. In the last issue, he critiqued Raymond Moody's Life After Life, titling his essay, Parapsychology and the Study of Death. These articles and book reviews were not listed on his CV, I'm sure because the journal he and Alfonso tried to establish was not available generally. But the first article he listed on his CV was also published in 1976. It appeared in the Spanish journal Sí Comunicación and was entitled Out-of-Body Experiences, a Review of the Modern Experimental Evidence. In the first year of his career, he had touched on three topics that were with him until he stopped working in the late fall of 2020. Out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, and the histories of psychical research and parapsychology, and also the importance of being accurate. Among the professional habits he exhibited as a 21-year-old were using book reviews, especially reviews of multiple books in different languages, as a teaching tool, and making sure the writing had a neutral, as objective as possible stance based on deep research and a detailed knowledge of the relevant literature. Before I move on in this review, I wanted to acknowledge the important contribution to this presentation that dropped out of the blue into my emails on the 11th of January this year. That day was a difficult day. It was the anniversary of the day that Carlos first entered the hospital and the day we found out, excuse me, that he had tumors on his temporal lobe. Excuse me. Sonali Bhatt Marwa and Ed May have been friends of Carlos's and mine for many years. Sonali had been working through a literature review and came across, as she said, several of Carlos's papers, both historical and theoretical, that were of interest to her and Ed. She told me in the email that she would be honored to help me prepare for publication a collection of his work. I had a vague notion that this was something I should embark on, but I was thinking, well, I'll get to it maybe in a couple of years. The notion that a multi-volume set might be published sooner, like the 4-volume set that Sonali and Ed had already published of Ed's laboratory work, was interesting and extraordinarily comforting to think about. I consider myself a pretty good academic editor with a small track record in publishing, but I consider Sonali not only much more effective as an editor than I am, but also somebody who brought a number of these multi-volume projects out in a timely fashion. Unfortunately, the words timely fashion infrequently apply to me. We started the project a few days later, and Sonali transferred the contents of Carlos's publications from his CV, peer-reviewed and more informal, to a spreadsheet that has allowed me not only to quantify his prodigious output and know what to look for when searching his files. The process of providing the counts of categories and examples of published work that I am presenting to you as representative of his wider set of work would have been significantly more difficult to compile without that spreadsheet. Carlos's, now we're moving into Carlos's work. So this is the section called the work. For some reason, I forgot to put that on the first slide. Carlos's University of Virginia experience began in September 1982 through May 1986. As you see, that was the research assistantship, and then March of 2003 through May of 2010. Not only was he working for Dr. Stevenson, who had a firm belief that any phenomena, any experience, any topic could be approached in a systematic, empirically nuanced, and scientific way. Carlos found the staff congenial and developed a deep and long-lasting friendship with Emily Kelly, and later with Ed Kelly. Emily worked with Stevenson for many years. It was through the division that he met Erlendur Haraldsson, an Icelandic psychologist who not only became another longtime friend, but also Carlos's mentor. His output in the first 4 years stayed close to his original interests and the work of the unit. When he returned to Charlottesville, his productivity increased and his interests widened again. The Liebold article that you see here was awarded the Harold and Sherry Kraselnik Award for the best first paper on hypnosis published in the American Journal of Clinical Hypnosis in 2010. And these are 3 of the articles that he published while he was there. There's many more. This was published obviously in the early period, and then Psychical Research in the Psychological Review, 1894 to 1900, a bibliographic note was published in the 2010s, I think, no, 2009, and the Liebold, I know I'm saying this wrong, I apologize, article was also published in 2009. The photograph was taken in the old building at a Christmas potluck lunch, and from the left is Natasha A.G. Chisdes, Carlos, and then Jim Tucker. Those of you who know Carlos's work or have read the biography published by the Society for Psychical Research Sciencyclopedia, written by Michael Duggan and James Matlock, you know that I have been taking a less traveled path around Carlos's work, only mentioning some of his core interests at the beginning and not mentioning his sustained interest in the work of the Italian psychical researcher Ernesto Bozzano and the Italian medium Eusapia Palladino, probably his most favorite topic. For a scholar whose written output of all types numbers more than 600 items, of whose writing, academic writing, more than 280 articles. Wait, I got myself confused. Out of this 600, of more than 200 articles are planned for the 4-volume set that Sonali, Ed, and I are working on. They include the peer-reviewed articles, book chapters, blog posts, and other types of writing. The first 3 volumes will cover his academic work and have themes, and the 4th one will include quite a bit of his more public-facing writing for the general public. It is true that his out-of-body experiences, his work on out-of-body experiences, he never had one himself, their features and after effects, the psychological characteristics of those who report the experiences, hauntings, aura visions, spontaneous cases, all of these have been very important in his work. And as for professional issues, the cost of committing your career to a marginal discipline and the history of psychical research and parapsychology, and the history of psychical research, parapsychology, psychology, and the relationship of all of these disciplines to each other And while dissociation, the history of mediumship, and the understanding of out-of-body experiences all benefit greatly from access to Duke's library, the Rhine Library, his work has also been fueled by a wide field of intellectual curiosity and the developing mad online research skills that came into play after the 1990s. While he was at the Rhine, and I've got, again, examples from different periods. The first one was Trends in the Study of Out-of-Body Experiences, an Overview of Development Since the 19th Century. A collaboration with the historian Pascal Lemalafon and the psychologist Renaud Alvarado to publish Spiritist Delusions and Spiritism in the Nosography of French Psychiatry from 1850 to 1950 in the History of Psychiatry in 2013. That was a later period at the Rhine. And Mediumship, Psychical Research, Dissociation, and the Powers of the Subconscious Mind, that was published in, I think, in 2014. Also, while we were still at the Rhine. The Parapsychology Foundation, we were on site from 2000 and then ran a virtual office from 2003 to 2008. And Carlos came back as a consultant and a research fellow in January 2015. And we both have been working with the Parapsychology Foundation since then till 2020. They have supported the ParaMOOC courses. The paper on the history of the grants program at the PF during its first 50 years is an article based mainly on the Foundation's archives and Eileen and Lisa Coley's firsthand knowledge of much of the grant periods across the life of the Foundation. The paper was presented at the Parapsychological Association Convention in New York City in August of 2001. We were on the arrangements committee for the conference, which included events celebrating the PF's 50th anniversary. So while it was a celebratory piece, it also represented a significant amount of archival research, which was also typical of Carlos's work. The theoretical paper on the concept of survival of bodily death and the development of parapsychology was written to be presented as a Tate lecture, an invited lecture, in London in October of 2001. Because the talk was scheduled so close to 9/11 and we were living in New York City, it was decided that a colleague in London would deliver that talk. The third article representing his time at the Parapsychology Foundation it also represents a series of papers that Carlos wrote alone with colleagues and published in the History of Psychiatry journal. Mostly they focused on 19th century and early 20th century intellectuals, academics, and scientists whose work or thought was related to the history of psychiatry. All three of these articles required sustained research. The first two articles benefited by the comprehensiveness of the holdings, not only in psychical research and parapsychology in the 19th and 20th centuries at the Parapsychology Foundation, but also journals of other types, dissertations, academic books, and articles. The library also included a variety of literature going back into history that was related to other disciplines that provide context for the core collections. The history of the grants program at the Parapsychology Foundation paper, that, as I said, required raking through those PF archives, where Carlos was able to read grant applications, the written records of grant decisions, the grant reports, and correspondence, plus have these conversations with Lizette and Eileen. And he always, I have to say, loved working in that library and having access to that library. That picture is from one of our visits to the library where it now exists out in Greenport on Long Island. And he and Lizette Coley's husband had gone to the hardware store in Riverhead, and he'd gotten his little work belt there. The final one of the places that we've been is Atlantic University. We were there from May 2010 to January 2013, the end of January 2013. There are 2 articles that Carlos researched and published while serving as a visiting scholar at Atlantic University. His interest in OBEs and NDEs and the wider category of the study of death included an interest in the history of psychological detachment in dying. He had a profound interest in dissociation because of the early contributions published in the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research. And that's Carlos in the top photo, of course, at his desk in our apartment on the grounds of the ARE. The desk that helped him miss his own desk less, and his own desk is behind me, the roll top behind me, the first piece of furniture he ever bought when he came to North Carolina. In the second photograph, Carlos is with the psychologist Stanley Kribner, a long-time friend and mentor who not only sent work our way when we needed it, but shared Carlos's interest in dissociation and the history of the concept. Now, you might think it's a little odd that I have included the article that Christine, Carlos, and I worked on, which was published more recently, but the research that underlies that publication was partly carried out through a grant that Christine obtained from the Fundação Bial, and the survey work that Carlos completed for that project was done while he was working at Atlantic University. He was a visiting scholar there and made a number of wonderful friends. So in terms of the legacy, I can't claim to be an objective judge of Carlos's worth as a friend or a husband, a colleague or mentor or a scholar. I mean, he was just wonderful. Just like normal couples, we had our grumpy moments. And when we were younger and more energetic, some really heated arguments about science that scared our upstairs neighbor until she learned to open her door and see if she could hear the names of well-known physicists or philosophers, or just, listen, I'm telling you that anecdotal evidence can be powerful. And that was him. When we started out, I was an experimentalist with a hearty disdain for anecdotal evidence. Thank God he taught me. He never met a stranger. And if he took you on as someone he wanted to mentor, you could change your mind entirely about working in the field, and he would stay right with you, looking out for the things you were interested in, checking in to make sure everything was going right for you, and so on. Close colleagues were family, and family were precious. Whether it was out to dinner or combing through an antique store, or trooping down to the movie theater for yet another Marvel movie, he put all of himself into every experience. He was an animal lover. When visiting my mother in Northern Illinois in her house in the country, he could take a walk around the property and come back having seen more birds, foxes, and deer than my mother had seen in the entire year before we came to visit. He taught me how to love my cats and not just appreciate them without actually developing a relationship with them. Whenever I would come out of my office to get a cup of tea, the cats would be sleeping on his desk, one in front of the screen and one squeezed between the keyboard and the desktop. Whether he was singing happy birthday, posing with pals at conferences, blowing off steam after a long conference in Utrecht, that's that photo, deep in work the minute before, or just leaning into the experience, he was present in a very positive way. I wish I had photos of the day that Lizette Coley, Carlos, and I went to visit a mediumship exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum in New York City. As we walked through the exhibit rooms, Carlos would stop and tell Lizette something about the medium, his or her phenomena, the researchers who investigated her. I wandered off, having had those conversations with Carlos many times before. When I returned to join them, a group had gathered behind them at a respectable distance, but straining to hear what he was saying. The second time I wandered back, their entourage had grown. He was too engrossed in his conversation with Lizette to realize he'd collected a crowd, but if he'd noticed them, he would have probably been more than happy to include them in his impromptu tour through the history of mediumship. He left 4 books partially written and planned. Massimo Biondi and Andreas Sommer have pledged to help me pull these projects together. Just a couple of days ago, Alfonso Martinez Taboas agreed that he would help me pull together an anthology of Carlos's 26 articles in Spanish. And I have mentioned the possibility of a fetchrift to Alfonso and to Massimo and Michael Nam and Andreas and to Wellington and Fatima, I think I did. If not, here I am saying it, you guys. And that's something I'd like to do later on. I want to move over to this photo because they're kind of, I'm going to read you the title because the bottom one is so teeny tiny. An article and an essay book review were left in process. Massimo Biondi and Michael Nam have been Carlos's favorite collaborators for a couple of years. He and Michael had submitted an article on the luminous phenomena reported at the death of a member of the Monk family. After Carlos's death, Michael took over the project and edited for publication the article, which appeared in the Journal of Anomalistics recently at the end of 2021. It's an interesting case, but it suffers from the way in which it has been told and analyzed before. I was delighted that Michael was able to pull the final version together into a publishable piece. In the same months that Carlos was setting his book projects aside and resigning from his positions as book editor from 2 different journals, he was also working on an essay review of a reprint of Ernesto Bazzano's book on bilocation phenomena. The editor of the journal for whom the article was intended asked me to see if it could be brought into a publishable condition. By that time, Carlos's illness was interfering in his ability to write and to research. I reached out to Massimo Biondi after I was notified of the referee reports and the state of that article, and asked Massimo if he could help me with a revision, or better yet, take it over, because I'm not able to read Italian. I found the book manuscript that we were going to be working, that he was going to be working on in 2023, or that Carlos was going to be working on, that related to this project, and Massimo and I have decided to work on this book project together in 2023. The topic was related. And so with the materials at hand, that draft of the essay review and the materials from that book that had 14 chapters planned and 7 of them written, Massimo was able to revise the piece, and it's now in press with the Journal of Scientific Exploration. So thank you for your attention. I apologize for the whirlwind feel of this presentation. The links on the slide are live. I will be uploading the PowerPoint to SlideShare, and you'll be able to click through to get it. You can, if you want to go and check it out without having the PowerPoint at your fingers, you just search on the Azire or my name, or the title of this talk, and you'll be able to find the SlideShare. I will be uploading it probably later this afternoon. I still need to edit the speaker's notes a bit. Carlos's academic.edu account is still up on the system and includes downloadable publications as well. This is also true of his ResearchGate account. I haven't as yet contacted these 2 websites to see if I can take over his pages and update them, but I also have an academia.edu account and a ResearchGate account, and many of our co-authored papers are also available on my accounts. In addition, if you go to the azire.org website, you will find a publications page that also needs to be updated, but almost everything that's listed there is in a PDF or invites you to ask me for a reprint. There is also a biographical, an updated biographical piece on Carlos that includes his includes all of the links that I have to the various memorials that have appeared in Ezio Cardena's journal, in the Journal of Anomalistics, in the Australian Journal of Psychical Research, and once I get it, the SPR obituary that I wrote as well, which in which I included information about the family. So Vivian, that's the one for you. I'll send you a copy. I have finished up with Carlos's what used to be my favorite picture of Carlos. And if anybody has any questions or comments, I would be more than happy to take them if we have the time. I think I've gone over my time.
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Dr. Zingrone, for that wonderful lecture and for detailing the extensive scholarship of Carlos. That was absolutely amazing. We do have time for questions. Those individuals on Zoom, if you use the hand raise feature, it might be a little bit easier under reactions. And of course, in our lovely audience here, if you guys have questions, feel free.
Thank you, Michael.
Any questions?
I can see the questions. Thank you, Morgan. Ramses has asked, what about Paramook? Brian Williams is on this on the Zoom, so I hope I have mentioned this to him before. I think I have, but I am hoping that Brian Williams, who was our third wheel on all of the Paramooks and was greatly helpful at every stage, and I hope are going to do a Paramook in 2023. I hate to leave that conference alone, and we were planning on doing one on ghosts, poltergeists, and hauntings, which is something that well, Brian is expert in a lot of things, but it's something that he had written a presentation for last time, and it did not get recorded, so that was a sad thing. Let me pull up the chat over here. Oh, thank you, David. That's so nice. And I'm very happy that Morgan Knudsen is happy about the Paramook, because she has got to be one of our best chat box discussants.
We have a question here in Carrollton.
Hello, it's me.
Okay.
Yeah, you made me cry just then. That was really beautiful. Thank you for a really wonderful set of memories and a really great summary of his career and your own work. Yeah, it's just a question really about when you think the publication date would be for the book you're working on with Ed May and Sonali, because I'm excited about that. I'd like to jump on that as soon as that comes out and get it for our library.
We're in the stage of preparing volume 1, which is focus on history, some of his history articles of things that happened in the 19th century. That's going into the publisher soon. We will, and that they gave us the go ahead to do that. We haven't gotten any word yet from that particular, from their acquisition committee, whether or not they are willing to take the 4 volumes. The second volume will be history of the 20th century. The third volume will be OBEs, NDEs, and other kinds of research and theoretical papers. And then the 4th volume will be the best of what he wrote for the online, Leslie Price's online newsletter, Sci Pioneer, and for Minefield, the professional, the members newsletter as well. So we're hoping that will happen. We are committed to getting these out, and Sonali is working very quickly. She feels that all 4 of the volumes will be ready for a publisher within the next 10 months, maybe closer than that. And if the current person that we're discussing, who they have had a lot of success with, doesn't decide to pick it up, we will beat the bushes for another publisher, and worst comes to worst, we'll publish it ourselves. So it will come out at some point, but I expect it's going to be about a year before it's published, or maybe a year and a half.
That's great. Yeah,
thank you, Layla. I didn't see you on there. I'm sorry, Christine. I didn't mean to step on you. I just saw one of Carlos's sisters on the on
I
the
was just
chat.
saying that's great. It's exciting.
Well,
One other quick question.
I just wanted to mention that Andreas and I are going to get together to try and complete the history of the importance of the Society for Psychical Research's articles on dissociation and hypnosis in the 19th and early 20th century to psychology and the development of those concepts in psychology. He had gotten the Parrott Work grant for that and wasn't able to write that article, that book rather. And the book that Massimo and I are hoping to finish off is on the use of force by intellectuals and scientists and psychical researchers in 19th century Europe. So that's another one that we're hoping to get out sometime in 2023 or 2024.
You're going to be busy.
Well, that's a good thing.
It is, yes. While I still have the mic, do you have any other research projects or anything that you're doing at this point or planning to do outside of this?
Yes, actually, I am involved with another thing that happened to me in January that was so kind was I was asked, I just saw Vivian, his other sister, saying that she loved the bookstore story. I should have mentioned that the Strand bookstore was also very close to Weiser's cult bookshop. So after Albert did his wonderful thing, finding Richet's autobiography, they went over to the Strand to get architectural books for Albert. So it was a good day for both. What was I saying? Oh, in January, I heard from Gerhard Meyer and from the IGPP in Germany and Cedar Leverett, who is a colleague of his, and had been a student in the Paramook. And I have been involved in not only a special issue of the Journal of Anomalistics, which will be published in 20, I don't know where my brain is, 2022 in December. It is an issue that is honoring and extending the Women in Parapsychology conference that the Parapsychology Foundation organized and sponsored and put on in Dublin, Ireland in 1991. Rhea White, who was one of the co-organizers, asked me, who, you know, a kid, to come along and have some say about what we were talking about now, the structure of the conference was going to happen and so on, as well as inviting me to do a talk that is in the proceedings of that conference. So with that in mind, we have talked to a number of people and asked them to do invited essays for us on the topic of women in parapsychology. Fatima Machado of the University of Sao Paulo, Caroline Watt, the new Kursler professor of parapsychology at University of Edinburgh, Ina Schmid, I think is her name, who's a historian in Germany, and I've forgotten who the other person was. Oh my goodness. Are writing invited addresses, and we have a couple of other people who have committed but haven't turned in, kind of a plan yet. Also in concert with that, but separate actually, Cedar was working on a survey of women in parapsychology, whether you're a researcher or a graduate student, an administrator, or doing something that's related to parapsychology, but not directly in the scientific and academic line. And those surveys are still going out. I do not have the, I don't know, Ramses, if you can find that URL for the chat, but that is still ongoing and people can still get that survey and fill it out. And we realized we didn't make a big thing about defining who was female, but anybody who presents as female or feels female or is female, whatever. We want everybody who has a position in and around scientific parapsychology that's interested to complete that survey. And Cedar and I are guest editors of this issue of the Journal of Anomalistics. We will both have editorials. Mine will focus on dual career, the literature now of dual career couples, women in science, that kind of thing, and relate it back to my authorship and gender article that I wrote back in 1986 when I was at the Institute for Parapsychology, and also a history graduate student at that time at Duke University. At CEDAR, it will be presenting a variety of things, including the results of the survey. So those are the two big things that I'm working on now. Fatima and I have also cooked up a couple of projects to do together, one related to the Women in Parapsychology project. So, and we will be having a symposium, with an online symposium with the Parapsychological Association, I think in November of 2022, with some of the people who are publishing. We did put out a call for papers, and we have some wonderful papers. Renaud Everard has written one, and there are quite a lot of really good papers that have come in over the transom and have been invited on the basis of the abstract to complete. So it should be a very, very good issue. And I am very grateful to Gerhard Meyer, the chief editor of the Journal of Anomalistics, that he is enthusiastic and just a joy to work with.
Thank you for that, Nancy.
You're welcome.
Just a reminder, the participants on Zoom, you would like to ask a question, you can use the raise hand feature. I have a question, Dr. Zingrone. What would you say would Carlos's kind of best piece of advice that he would give to young scholars interested in parapsychology, kind of on their way up? What kind of advice would he give?
Read, read, read. And if you can't find what you're looking for, let him know. That was his main thing. He would get very involved. I mean, Patrick was so right. He was a colleague teacher. If you were interested, you were his colleague right off the bat. And I have taken that into my teaching because I teach graduate students at North Central University psychology and personality theory, and I also teach in the gender and sexuality fluidity program as well, and history of psychology, as well as the foundation courses. And I have tried to apply that absolutely, that when I get a new student, a new graduate student, I always try to tell them that they are a colleague. And as a colleague, I am going to be trying to help them move along, and that all of us at North Central are very student-centered and are more than happy to talk about our journey, because that is also a part of what Carlos would do, is talk a little bit about his own journey and the journeys of others to finish their education and to do research and so on. And then he would just keep his eyes open and his ears open and figure out what it was they needed from him, encourage them to tell him what they needed from him, and off he would go to try and make sure they had it. Yvonne Wallerston, who's on this call and has become a very good friend of mine and was a very good friend of Carlos's, their relationship started with that kind of an interaction. I think in his entire life, he probably wrote off maybe 3 people. And if you were wrote off, it was because you were cruel, angry, or just not the kind of person that he wanted to, whose energy he wanted in his environment. And once he wrote you off, forget about it. And I was always surprised because I started out an even grumpier person than I am now, and I'm pretty not too grumpy now. And I think he had an incredible impact on my personality and my attitude towards life and my teaching and my writing and so on. Even though I started out editing the out of his papers for English, he ended up editing my papers. So I learned a lot from him, especially about how to mentor and what that meant.
Thank you for that. I do see a question here in the chat from Ramses. He says, when can we expect Carlos's Spanish articles to be available, and where will they be published?
Well, one of the things that I want to do is get started on that after I'm settled. I'm moving in May back to the county of Northern Illinois that I grew up in. Carrollton and I had that plan since 2018. We kind of, sorry, Vivian, Layla, but we kind of figured we wanted to go where there were the most grandbabies. And my brother Bill and my brother Tom have put together a pretty good group of grandbabies. So we had decided, well, we'll go back to Northern Illinois. And also because Carlos, but even though he grew up in Puerto Rico, was just crazy about cold weather. He loved being able to wear, his sweaters and wool jackets and all that. So he was really looking forward to it. So I decided I could break that rule of not doing anything in the first year after you lose somebody and just go home. And so that's what I'm doing. And after I get there and get settled, Alfonso and I will probably get started on picking the articles, and I will start on the permissions process and all that. And our idea is to put together a book that's entirely in Spanish, and then we'll start looking for publishers in South America. I know that Alfonso has published quite a lot and has some good relationships with publishers on on the island. So I hope that that will go quickly. I would expect it doesn't appear until 2023, but I'll keep you all posted.
Let's see another question in the chat from Beth. She says, I'm looking at Carlos's desk behind you, and it looks like a painting of the ocean, or maybe it's a stack of papers in the middle. What is it?
Oh, that's a stack of papers. I have been going through, there are two segments of what Carlos left behind. The papers, which Blynn Olivieri, who was super wonderful to work with, took the most important ones of, although I do have a box being put together for you, Blynn. All the stuff from Edinburgh has arrived. And then the second part of it is his library, which he wanted to go to Wellington Zangari and his unit at the University of Sao Paulo, and whatever he didn't want to other colleagues around the world. So I have also been working on various aspects of the library, and the library includes a lot of small periodicals that were published for a little while, or that he only had for a little while, and that's what's back there. And that pile actually is where I found the Explorando lo Paranormal, the journal he and Alfonso had started, which I don't believe I'd ever heard about before. So that was really exciting. And I was grateful that I've been taking Spanish all these years and could read the contents. It was really fun. Thanks, Beth. I love this desk. I was always very jealous of it, although I had one of those big, kind of coastal, white, sort of French provincial type looking desks also next to him when we were in Charlottesville. And I visited that upon the Division of Perceptual Studies when they remodeled, and I hope they have forgiven me.
Any other questions from the audience? All right, well, thank you so much, Dr. Zingrone, for delivering this year's Bill Roll Lecture. It was absolutely an honor for us to host you, if virtually, for our lecture this year. On behalf of the psychology program at the University of West Georgia and Ingram Library Special Collections, we want to thank you all for attending this year's lecture. Your interest and support of parapsychology and research into exceptional experiences helps raise awareness around this important subject and area of study. We look forward to welcoming everybody back next year. Thank you.